Fires are raging across Brazil's Amazon rainforest.
The world's largest rainforest is being destroyed at an alarming rate.
Much of the blame is being heaped on Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro.
I'd never given much thought to the Amazon rainforest. All the media coverage, though, of the wildfires got me wondering, is it really true that the Amazon rainforest is being destroyed? Should I be upset about that happening, or is it no big deal? If it is a big deal, is there some way we could save it? Ecologists, environmentalists, and politicians have strong opinions about the answers to those questions. The economics of the Amazon, however, are barely discussed in the public debate. The Amazon rainforest covers roughly 1/3 of South America, stretching across parts of 9 different countries but lying primarily in Brazil. It's by far the world's largest forest, and it is the home to roughly 10% of all the species on the planet. The vast interior is relatively untouched, but deforestation has already shrunk the forest by almost 20%, primarily in the Brazilian Amazon, where the great majority of the 30 million people living near the Amazon reside. A new Brazilian government, led by Jair Bolsonaro, took office in 2019. Facing an unemployment rate over 12% and sluggish economic growth, Bolsonaro made good on his campaign promises to scale back the Amazon protections and regulations put in place in 2005. Deforestation is now back on the rise. The international community has condemned the rollback of protections, and countries like Germany and Norway have even cut aid payments to Brazil. It's easy to understand the backlash, but it's just as easy to understand why people cut down the forest. The regions in and around the Amazon are among the poorest in Brazil, a relatively poor country to begin with. Cleared land provides an immediate economic benefit to the owner. Land in the Amazon is deforested for a variety of uses, but one particular industry dominates.
Cattle ranching is really the way that people use the land. 70% or so of the cleared land of the Amazon is in cattle pasture.
Now, there are 75 million cattle in the Amazon, but it's really not that great a place to raise cattle, from what I understand. Neither the soil, it's also far away from places where people want to eat beef.
The productivity of cattle ranching in the Amazon is notoriously low.
Why are we raising cattle in the Amazon? There's one Amazon, and there's a million places to raise cattle.
It is a great example of a market failure, I think, where converting a 300-ton forest that would have, 200 tree species and tons of unknown other species for a weak cattle pasture that will give you maybe 30, 50 kilos of beef a year is one of the worst trade-offs, I think, in the world.
For many, the natural reaction has been to protest, demoralize, to blame the Brazilian government. Those are all reasonable reactions, but the fact is that the people doing the burning are mostly decent people trying to scratch out a living, responding to the incentives given to them. If we want to solve the problem, we need to change those incentives. And who better to think about that challenge than an economist?
I'm Michael Greenstone. I was the chief economist for the Council of Economic Advisors in the first year of the Obama administration.
Greenstone is now back as my colleague at the University of Chicago, but while he was in government, one of his jobs was coming up with environmental regulations.
And the trick of doing things through regulations is that they have to go through a cost-benefit analysis. And any regulation that reduces carbon is going to have some costs that's going to be measured in dollars, and it's going to have some benefits, which are going to be measured in CO2. Dollars are always going to beat CO2 because people don't know what CO2 is. And so my idea, which I started with my friend Cass Sunstein, was to come up with a unified number called the social cost of carbon for the U.S. government. And that was a way to monetize the damages of the release of an additional ton of CO2. And so the idea was by using a global value, you could induce reactions that would reduce emissions that would benefit people in the U.S.
Taking all of these variables into account, Greenstone and his team concluded that the social cost of carbon is $50 per ton of CO2.
The average man, woman, child in the United States emits about 16 metric tons per CO2 per year. So you could think of yourself, or the average person, as doing about $800 of climate damages per year.
Greenstone's hope was that putting a price on carbon and ensuring that that price had legitimacy would lead to more thoughtful policy, although this hasn't been 100% successful.
In some sense, climate change is a super boring economics problem in that it's very easy to figure out what to do globally. That is, you should set a price on carbon, and then you should fund R&D and green energy. Super easy. Those turn out to be pretty politically challenging to do. And so effectively in the U.S., what we've been doing are a bunch of kind of mandate-style policies that aim for reductions in particular places in the economy.
Regulations on auto emissions, for instance. What about the strategy of just telling people they should use less carbon?
When you tell people you should just use less carbon, I think what you're doing is you're sliding into making it a moral issue. And once it's a moral issue, it's very murky waters. One number that gets stuck in my head, as I do a lot of research in the state of Bihar in India, per capita electricity consumption there on an annual basis is about 270 kilowatt hours per person per year. That's like running two 60-watt bulbs 6 hours a day. In the United States, it's like 13,000 kilowatt hours per person per year. If you're sitting in Bihar, it's a totally unacceptable situation to have that level of electricity, and they have to improve their lives, and electricity allows them to do that. And so, trying to express this as a moral issue to them, the moral issue to them is that there are 270 kilowatt hours per person. If you really want to talk about morals, think about Bihar.
Or think about Brazil. To the poor farmer in the Amazon, it isn't about morality, it's about survival. This is one particular case in which we don't need moral arguments because the economic arguments are so overwhelmingly persuasive. A hectare of Amazon land cleared for raising cattle, a hectare is just under 2.5 acres, sells for less than $1,000. With a social cost of carbon of $50 per ton of CO2 and a current best estimate of the carbon stored in the Amazon, each hectare of land preserved as forest is worth over $28,000 based on the carbon alone. That isn't even putting a value on biodiversity or tourism. When land is worth almost 30 times more to all of humankind as forest, but instead people cut it down to grow cattle, that is the absolute definition of a market failure. A market failure with a very straightforward remedy.
There is a strong economic case for the world subsidizing the protection of the Amazon.
If you look at the Amazon, more than half of the remaining forests of the Amazon are in some form of protection, parks or reserves or indigenous territories. There's a frustration that whatever Brazil does, it's never enough. If Brazil owns 2/3 of the Amazon forest, it's up to Brazil to do what it wants with it. So that's one dimension of it. Another dimension really is it's an amazingly inexpensive venture to think of paying off all of those landholders in Brazil for the foregone profits from converting forests to cattle. And the key would be to have a real financial proposition on the table that compensates Brazilian farmers and compensates Brazil.
Despite all the political bluster about infringement on its sovereignty, the Brazilian government has actually signaled its willingness to trade preservation of the Amazon for cash from other countries. In an interview with the Financial Times, Brazil's Minister of the Environment, Ricardo Salles, said, quote, "The opportunity cost must be paid by someone, and someone means those who have the funds or the necessary sources of finance for that." He estimated the cost to be $120 per hectare, or about $12 billion a year. By my calculations, from a purely economic perspective, Brazil should be willing to stop deforestation for $1 to $2 billion per year. The rich nations of the world should be willing to pay up to $40 billion. That's a lot of room for bargaining, and the $12 billion number that the Brazilian minister threw out doesn't seem crazy.
I may never go to the Arctic and see a polar bear, and I may never go to the Amazon. But I feel good that they exist, and it's not just that I feel good, I'd be willing to pay something for it. And that is like an adder to the instrumental value of the Amazon. The value of preserving the Amazon is large enough that it should be easy to pay off the ranchers and still preserve the Amazon.
Well, Joe Biden has been president for a year, and I'm sorry to say, neither he nor any other world leaders have taken my proposal to heart. Meanwhile, the situation just gets worse and worse. Between August 2020 and July 2021, the rate of Amazon deforestation was the highest in a decade, up 57% from the year before. There aren't that many easy victories when it comes to fighting climate change, but this is one of them. There's absolutely no reason why we should be screwing this up.